Hi, everyone, and welcome to Breaking the News Deep Cut Conversations, our interview series that previews our documentary podcast in development, Breaking the News, CNN and the Birth of Chaos Media. I'm John Hashimoto, joined by my co host and series co producer, Bill Smee. Hi, Bill.
Hello, John.
Our guest today is Bill Burke, a former senior executive at Turner Broadcasting and the Weather Channel, and the co author with Ted Turner of Call Me Ted. Few people had a closer vantage point on Ted's philosophy, his ambitions, his regrets, and at a moment when CNN and the Turner legacy appear to be entering yet another era of consolidation and uncertainty. Bill is uniquely positioned to help us answer that question. What would Ted think? Bill, welcome and thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you both for having me on.
Bill, I'll tee it up with that question. What would Ted think? When you look at the current state of CNN's ratings declines, ownership shifts, layoffs tied to debt, and I'm afraid probably some more layoffs tied to debt. What do you think Ted's reaction would be?
It's a great question, and it's not an easy question. And I am always very careful about trying to put ideas or words into other people's mouths, in particular Ted Turner's. And I have such great respect for him, and his views are his own. And so what I could reflect on is from my experiences, things he might have said or done that would give me some sense of what he might be thinking. One I would say is that Ted was a technology visionary in terms of putting TBS and CNN up on a satellite. That was the bleeding edge of technology back then. But I had a front row seat in the late 90s when I was still at the company when we were trying to explain to Ted the importance of the internet and how that was going to change everything. And at one point, he finally said, "That's for you young guys to figure out. I'm done. It's like I found California. Now you want me to build the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm exhausted." And I think, like a lot of us, myself included, I think a lot of what's happening today would be a little bit hard to get your head around. Between, what happened to these cable networks? What happened to subscription fees, our money train? What happened to X, Y, and Z? What happened to just straight journalism and giving the news? Why is it all opinion? So I think for like a lot of us, I think there would be a little bit of, oh my gosh, I don't even recognize this anymore. That's one. I think he'd find a lot of it. Certainly he would be sad. I mean, he was sad when he was eventually pushed out of the company, very sad. And I was starting the book project with him just after all that had happened. And I think in some ways, being able to relive the great parts of his life and career helped pull him out of a lot of the tough times he was having. So I think it would break his heart to see the company splintered like this and to see CNN staffers under the gun the way they must feel like they are. And I know that would trouble him. I will say, too, that I think over the past several years, CNN's not the CNN that Ted founded. And I have great respect for the work that's being done there. And there's some amazing journalists. At the same time, though, as you on this call, I think, know, Ted was really about CNN should be about the news. It's not about the personalities. It always drove us nuts that Fox launched with "We Report, You Decide," because that was really what CNN was all about. And I think if anyone objectively looking at it would say that CNN has strayed from that for very understandable reasons, the competitive pressures. But I think Ted would have already been concerned about that. And then I think today he'd be really scratching his head and maybe scratching his head at this moment. I don't want to talk about Ted in the past tense. So that's a long answer to a tough question.
You mentioned Ted, he built CNN to serve the truth and public trust and put great stock in that. I wonder, as you've watched the landscape evolve, what do you think Ted would think about some of the other owners, from Murdoch to Bezos to the Ellisons?
Yeah.
Because, and the question of editorial independence, which I think he so valued.
Yes. I also was lucky to have a front row seat to the height of the feud with Rupert Murdoch. And it's hard to believe it goes all the way back to the 1990s. But, I was there when Ted was challenging Rupert Murdoch to a boxing match. And I was at TBS and Brad Siegel was at TNT, and we were in a meeting and Brad said, "Ted, don't box him. We should put on WCW. You should wrestle him." He goes, No, I want to hit him. I want to be able to hit him. And, Ted back then made, I think, the unfortunate choice of comparing Rupert Murdoch to Hitler. If you ever want to escalate an argument, you compare someone to Hitler. And in defense, what he said when people push back, he's like, "I'm not saying he's going to kill millions of people." But what he said Hitler did was use the press to influence opinion. And his point at the time was, this is when Murdoch was more of a force in Europe, frankly. It was before Fox News had a lot of traction. He said Murdoch uses his papers in England and other places to decide who the next prime minister is going to be. They put their editorial force and frankly, their pseudo journalistic force behind the candidate they want and destroy the ones they don't. That's what Ted was saying. Ted was dead against that. And so to the extent that some of the people lurking now have political motivations in owning these journalistic outlets, Ted would have a serious problem with that. I think he would also really scratch his head at the fact that, a guy who built Amazon owns the Washington Post. Ted was funny about my job is to own a lot of content and push out a lot of content. That's the business I'm in. I was there when the phone companies were talking about acquiring, eventually AT&T did many years later. Said, I don't want to be part of a phone company. It's like people are going to call me saying my phone doesn't work.
In days like this, there's constant refrain on Facebook and in a lot of other places where those of us who are alums or those of us who work there connected with the company say, gosh, we sure wish Ted had never sold it, that he was still running the joint, still owned the joint. And when he did surrender control, was that inevitable? Was there another path? Or all of these hopes and dreams that we sometimes have about, gosh, maybe Ted will come back and buy CNN again? Is it the dynamics that were just inevitable?
That's a great question. No, I don't think it was inevitable. I think it became inevitable. Well, the first step in making it approach inevitability was selling to Time Warner way back in the 90s. But I will say, when people forget, but before the AOL merger, the Time Warner Turner merger was actually quite successful. There were a lot of great synergies, truly synergies created. I always try to remind people, Ted is the guy who greenlit the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And that was when he was in control of New Line, and the resources probably wouldn't have been there if we weren't part of Time Warner. And then absolutely his voting his shares for the AOL merger, that was the beginning of the end for Ted's career in that company. And he would say to people, he's like, I didn't quit, they fired me. So that wasn't his choice. And that die was cast, I'm afraid, when he agreed to sell his shares in the AOL deal. In terms of coming back and buying CNN, I don't know that any of the owners or stewards of that network had ever really contemplated selling it as its own entity. I think it was always going to be part of something bigger. And I've heard rumors that he and John Malone had talked about it and some other people, but I don't think that was possible. And to be honest too, and Ted said this to me when we were working on the book, when he leaves something, he leaves something. And so, he quit sailing in the shower one day and never sailed competitively again. And when he left that company, he launched restaurants and started the Nuclear Threat Initiative. He's not, and it was a challenge writing a memoir with him. He doesn't look back that much. Truly, he might have hoped it was in different hands than it wound up being or where it's headed. But I don't think he himself really had the gas in the tank to go back and do that.
One of the things we're looking at in this series is the idea that the sort of how we got to where we are today in the state of chaos media. And a real question that comes up, I'd be curious to get your thoughts, is, that when Ted launched CNN in 1980, as he did, it was revolutionary. It was the first global 24/7 all news network on all the time. And I guess the question is, did that innovation, even unintentionally, contain maybe the seeds that have led us decades on to this fractured, hyperpolarized environment that we're in today?
I think fairly emphatically, yes. And also on the unintended, obviously unintended. But I think what it set in motion, and then you guys know working there, I mean, a 24-hour network is a beast that needs to be fed. There's got to be something on all the time. Before you know it, it's a good business and other people jump in. So there's competition. And before you know it, the breaking news graphic is wildly overused, and my bias, but I think a lot of people would agree. And it's that fight for eyeballs, that fight for content, that got to feed the beast. And so I do think that the launch of CNN planted those seeds, again, unintentionally. And I'm still glad CNN launched. So it's not like, I wish that had never happened and we were still listening to 3 broadcast networks. That wouldn't have happened either. So I think it's a very good question. I think the answer is yes.
How do you think the nature of cable news did change our political sphere, if you will? I think it's our sense and a lot of people's perception, right? And Jon Stewart made this point quite clearly once, right? That it became far more performative. Politics did, right? Sure. And of course, cable crossfire shows fed into that. Is that your take as well, that it truly altered the nature of politics as well?
Absolutely. I mean, it's hard to even imagine or explain, to your kids that it didn't used to be this way. I mean, I think pre CNN, if a senator wanted to get word out, they might hope they were a guest on Face the Nation. I guess. I mean, I can't, right? I mean, how did you even, you'd issue press releases that maybe would get picked up someplace. Now it's, well, forget cable news, but obviously online, Twitter, heck, start your own, True Social. So the vetters are gone in many ways. The screens are gone. The moderation is gone. And I can speak directly to the people I want to, unfiltered, unvetted. And so, yeah, I think cable news, again, back to having 24 hours to fill, starting a show like Crossfire, that might be what you're referring to with Jon Stewart. Paul Begala and Tucker Carlson were the hosts that day. Fun facts to think back on what a different time that was. Yeah, so I think absolutely. And I think now back to what we were saying before about fighting for eyeballs, fighting for attention. How do you do that? You go loud, you go negative. We've always had negative politics. In the work I do now, I try to remind people good times weren't always good. There were a lot of bad things happening back then. We've always had flame-throwing politicians and that sort of thing. I just think now it's just much more of a cacophony. It's everywhere. It surrounds us. Someone said to me recently, in the old days, you used to find the news. Now the news finds you. And that's a big difference.
Well, it's so funny. Once again, you've kind of led us to what was going to be my follow-up to John's question is just that. I mean, so on the one hand, it's the personality-driven shouting and arguing that has become de rigueur and sort of been rewarded over time. But as you just mentioned, the news finding you, we now live in a world where algorithms and now AI have come on the scene. And I know you're a guy who knows technology well. What do you think what do you think that impact has been, and what worries you more? Does that worry you more than the shouting talking heads, or it's all of a piece, or what keeps you up at night as you think about these more existential dilemmas?
Yeah, the shouting and the noise and the news finding you is one thing. The news these algorithms' ability to take a person and say, okay, I know from their behavior that they're left of center, and I'm going to feed them more and more and more and more. And what happens is they end the day farther left of center. Right. And likewise on the right. And to me, and a lot of people say this, but it does start to feel like we have people living in different realities. We can't even agree on the very basic facts. January 6th was a peaceful rally. January 6th was an insurrection. And there's not a lot in between. And people personalize it. If you think January 6th was a peaceful, you are bad, evil. I hate you. If you think it was an insurrection, you're dopey, wrong. I hate, that I think is a worse outcome, is one of the worst outcomes, not to mention everything it's doing for our psyche. So I just feel like this ability to give people the opinions that agree with the ones they already have and maybe even drive them farther apart is a really bad thing. One of the good things I think about the old days was you knew when you were watching the news that it was an editorial. They'd put up a big fat graphic. It'd be like a different person usually, right? It wouldn't be the same person who opened that show, right? You knew, okay, that's that person's opinion. But I worry more about these algorithms' ability to drive us apart and to feed us separate realities. I think that's a very unsettling place to be.
When you think about CNN's future, for whether the 5-year horizon and the 10-year horizon, if you don't mind.
Boy, I might need a sorcerer's hat, but go ahead.
Crystal ball.
Exactly. I mean, what does it in your mind look like? And we all know you're an optimist by nature, but what's your take?
Yes, I am an optimist. And I do think for all its challenges, CNN is an enduring brand. People know what it is. And again, back to different realities. You'll have some people say it's a left-wing network. You have some people say it's a right-wing network. I don't know if I said a right-wing network, but some people feel like it's more down the middle. It's an enduring brand. It's also a brand that can live on different platforms. We saw that way back when we were at the company, when CNN.com very quickly, it was a perfect application for the internet. It's a very adaptable brand. So no buyer owner is going to want to throw that away, right? So that's one thing. I will say this is very fresh with CBS under new management and a lot of concerns about 60 Minutes and squelching stories. I watched Sunday night and it felt like an old 60 Minutes episode to me. They went after things that are going on in this administration. And I thought to myself, let's tap the brakes here a little bit. Let's not, because that's the other thing that this world has done to us. The minute something happens, we got to have a hot take, a hot opinion. And it's, oh my God, Paramount's going to win the bidding. CNN's going to hell. It's going to go far right. Maybe, but maybe not. And by the way, and Ted was this too, these are business people. The Ellisons have political views. I'm sure the Netflix folks have political views, and they might push those on the margins, but at the end of the day, they're business people and they want to run a business. And if there's room for a mainstream or left of center, whatever you want to call CNN news network, there will continue to be one. So I don't get as concerned about it turning upside down or, I guess the biggest concern I'd have is it's frankly not as good a business as it used to be. It doesn't get the subscription fees it used to. It's just not as good a business. So, what happens to that? That I think is a bigger question than what is more of it's an equal unknown as what's going to happen to it in terms of viewpoint and that sort of thing. They're spending an insane amount of money for this entity. So they are expecting to maintain and grow these businesses. So I'd be a little bit more bullish on CNN than a lot of people, but as you said, I'm an optimist. So we'll see.
I would just have one quick tack on to that is it's because you mentioned that the challenge really is on the business side, right? I think you make a tremendous point there about worrying about whether CNN goes tax right or left. There's a tendency to, as you say, for people to overreact to that anyway. And CNN's brand is CNN's brand. When Fox came along in the 90s, CNN didn't try to out Fox. But, from your perspective, the business side, the challenges are, Ted built this business on the cable model, which is part of what we're exploring, right? And cable fees. So is there a way forward that you can think of that might inspire us as we think about these large entities like CNN especially?
That might be the hardest question you've asked, and you've asked some hard ones, because that was that in so many ways, the secret sauce of the early cable business was subscriber fees. It was a guaranteed source of income, whether ratings were up or ratings were down. You got paid. If you ran home and garden television, you got paid whether I watched home and garden television or not. It was in my basic cable package, and it really lifted all these boats. And that's been an interesting legislative thing too, because everyone's like, oh, we got to break up these cable packages and then we could go a la carte. And it's like, okay, great. Now we can stream all these things. Well, guess what? Now they're all packaged together again. Just like the basic cable package is just more expensive. I have to buy more than one to get what I want to see because my baseball team's on this network. Anyway, so on that point, though, I think the streamer's ability to package these services and get paid for them, these streaming bundles, what I read yesterday, and it makes sense. Paramount Plus and HBO Max will be the same thing. Who knows what they'll call it? HBO can never figure out what to call HBO Max, so maybe they'll just give up. And they will command subscriber fees, so they can spend those how they will. So that, as annoying as it is as a consumer, that might be something that saves them.
People talk about a Bloomberg as the owner of CNN,
Right.
and Yahoo actually as the owner of CNN.
Yes.
I hate to say another billionaire, for goodness sakes, because that is got all sorts of risks associated with it. In your mind, is there a better owner?
There could be. I think on the journalistic side, like when you say Bloomberg, I envision someone who's, very different kind of journalism, but sort of that's where he made his fortune. What those entities that you mentioned, though, might not have, and they could probably strike a deal for it, but they wouldn't have this ability to roll a CNN into these bundled services that get a fee. I do think CNN standing alone in the ether, trying to build a streaming business that people pay for would be hard. I hate to say it, but it would. And frankly, in the early days of cable, as we said, there were a lot of people paying for CNN who never watched it. It was just part of their cable package. So it's two sides of a coin, I guess. On the one side, there's the journalistic interest and integrity, and then there's also the business side, and hopefully something of the two would meet. But I think a Bloomberg would struggle with the distribution and getting paid.
If Ted were 35 years old today instead of 85, I think, What kind of media company would he start, do you think? Would it be a global streaming news service, a creator-driven platform, something built entirely outside legacy television?
That's a great question. And again, I'm jumping way out of my area of expertise to speculate on TED. But what the heck? It's funny. I was talking to someone the other day, actually a former Turner person, Scott Sassa, and we were talking about AI production. Forget news for a second. Or if it were news, parody, that some bright young 35-year-olds or younger with Ted's energy and vision, instead of lamenting that AI is moving into the creative production space, embracing it and building a business to do inventive, funny, maybe challenging, arresting. Think about what Scott brought this up, what, the South Park people have done with some of this Trump stuff. I mean, boy, that gets your attention. And I think there will be businesses there. And I think a guy like Ted, and this might be my entertainment side of the company bias, might have found that really intriguing. This is a guy who colorized old movies. Okay. This is a guy who now that wound up being like the greatest film preservation effort in the history of film preservation. So it had but he colorized movies because they sold better in Europe when they had color and they weren't black and white. So I think he might embrace some of these. He was always about embracing disruptive technologies. I mean, he went to Washington to defend the TBS Superstation because he literally broke the FCC rules. You weren't supposed to be able to watch an Atlanta TV station more than 55 miles from the Atlanta TV tower. And he said, that's a dumb rule. So I'm going to go to Washington and change it. And so I think he would have embraced these things that are sort of breaking the models and are new and that are scaring other people. That is a wild hunch. And I'm just throwing it out
there. Yeah. He was a break things and move fast entrepreneur, like all of them at some level really are, right?
Absolutely.
Bill, thanks so much for all this.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you for your candor and giving us channeling Ted as best you could while being careful about that. We appreciate. And thank you for giving us a sense of, what it might look like for the future for Ted's empire and the future of CNN. We very much appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for watching Breaking the News Deep Cup Conversations. If this discussion resonated with you, we hope you'll share it with anyone who cares about the future of journalism, media ownership, and public trust. We're also inviting you to help us bring our documentary podcast series, Breaking the News, CNN and the Birth of Chaos Media, fully to life. This is an independent project built on deep reporting, archival research, and conversations like this one. It's about examining how the modern news ecosystem was built, where it fractured, and what's at stake now for all of us. Your support will make that possible. You'll find a link below to learn more and contribute to our fundraising campaign. Every donation helps us create this series and brings these conversations to life. In the weeks ahead, we'll release more Deep Cut conversations, each one illuminating another piece of the story. Thanks for being part of this community. We'll see you all next time.